If the second letter of John was about welcoming the wrong people, the third letter of John is a mirror image, a warning about failing to welcome the correct ones. This is the shortest book in the entire New Testament, just 14 verses, and John's most personal letter. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods, talking about the Bible one small step at a time. This is not written to a church, but an individual named Gaius. And the contrast is very different type of response to traveling ministers of the gospel, one marked by a generous, faithful hospitality, and one marked by arrogance, exclusion, and outright hostility towards the apostle himself. Where the second letter of John taught us to close the door to people who were spreading misinformation about Jesus, the third letter of John teaches us when and how to open that door. And it gives us some real specific three-dimensional pictures of what a faithful Christian community looks like and a faithful opposition to it looks like on the ground. Real relationships among real people and named people. So he's going to go ahead and greet Gaius, who he calls a dear friend, and that he hopes that his friend is prospering in every good way and being of good health. And he was glad when some brothers came and testified about his fidelity of truth. John identifies himself simply as an elder. And like I said, he's writing to a specific individual called Gaius, my dear friend. The term is personal affection that is used here. John repeats throughout this entire brief letter. This is not a circular letter to like multiple congregations like we saw with like First Peter or like a letter to a community like in Second John. It's a personal correspondence between two people who know each other very well. The prayer for Gaius to prosper in every way and be in good health, just as his your whole life is going well, reflects on a convention of ancient personal letters, which typically opened with wishes for the recipient's health and well-being. But John gives it a special anchor to it by tying physical prosperity and health to the spiritual reality that's evident already in Gaius's life. The Greek word behind it is, your whole life is going well, is specifically to Gaius's soul prospering. The spiritual life is flourishing. And John's prayer extends to the same kind of flourishing in other areas of his life. John's joy comes from a very specific report that some of the brothers came, told him about his fidelity to the truth. That guy's walking in the truth. And traveling believers had personally witnessed and reported back on Gaius' faithful character. And that testimony brings John genuine joy. He says that he has no greater joy than this. This is the greatest joy. I mean, that's pretty amazing, right? Echoing the same language of joy that closed both 1 John and 2 John. For John, there's no higher satisfaction than hearing that those he had discipled and loved are genuinely living out the truth that they have received. Then it goes on to the section that commends Gaius for some very specific virtues that 2 John warned against withholding from false teachers. Genuine, generous hospitality. But in this case, it's extended to the faithful, legitimate traveling ministers of the gospel, and strangers. They're strangers to Gaius personally. He doesn't know them for their namesake, but it's a way of basically a reverent way of referring to the name of Jesus Christ. That basically he's helping these people in the name of Jesus Christ, these traveling workers, itinerant missionaries, teachers, supporting the spread of the gospel, and deliberately accepted nothing from the pagans, meaning that they relied entirely on the generosity of the fellow believers like Gaius, rather than compromising their independence or the message by accepting support from these outside hostile groups of people or outside the faith. In Gaius's hospitality towards these workers had become known publicly. People talk about it, right? That they talk about the love before you're in your church because of this. This public testimony to private generosity is a reoccurring biblical theme. Genuine love, even when offered quietly and without fanfare, tends to become known and to bear witness as a character of one's offering. John urges Gaius to continue this pattern, sending these workers on their way in a manner worthy of God, meaning that this kind of provision and dignity and care that you're giving them reflects not just well on these workers, but it reflects well on God too. And that's the whole piece together. The theological principle that John draws from is the practice of that we should support each other. We should support people and co-workers in the truth. Gaius himself was probably not personally traveling or preaching or teaching, but because of his hospitality and material support, he became a genuine partner, a fellow worker in spreading the gospel. This is an important principle for every era of the church. Those who support faithfully the gospel's work, now materially, logistically, are not passive bystanders in the ministry. They are active participants in it and sharing in the fruits of its mission. But then he talks about something as a contrast. That's a contrasting figure here. He talks about this member, likely a leader in the church that John had previously written to, whose behavior stands out as a negative, a photographic negative towards everything Gaius has been modeling. John's description is direct and unflattering. That this guy, he loves to be the first among them. The Greek term in this is basically combining love with the desire to be preeminent, to dominate, to occupy a position of high standard, and to control inside of the community. This kind of love of preeminence has a practical and damaging consequence. This guy refused to receive John's authority and traveling brothers who John sent, even stopped those who wanted to travel, stopped those who wanted to extend hospitality to them. This guy said no, and went as far as to expel people from the church of the members who did show these members that John sent any sort of hospitality, faithful workers. And so this is a complete inversion of what Gaius was being commended for. Rather, in generous hospitality towards faithful gospel workers, this other guy models exclusion and control and punishment for the generosity itself. John also accuses this guy of malicious slander against the apostle himself. This Greek word is for talking nonsense, making baseless and harmful accusations. So this guy's saying stuff about me, and it's nonsense. It's complete nonsense. And this adds personal hostility towards the apostle himself. And institutional gatekeeping, I guess, he's saying, my community will not help you at all. Painting a picture of a man whose primary concern was protecting and expanding his own position and influence in the local church, even at the cost of the Apostle John directly helping his community. And that was hurting his fellow gospel workers, and it was hurting that guy's community in the process. John's direct counsel to Gaius is simple and very pointed. Don't imitate what is evil, but instead what is good. The contrast between this other guy and Gaius becomes a teaching tool. The object lesson is two competing visions of what leadership in the community life looks like, what competing visions inside the church could look like. One is oriented towards self-exaltation, control, and the other towards generous service and a genuine partnership in truth. He's comparing the one who does good from the one who does evil and has not seen God. One is oriented towards self-exaltation and control of the community and the church, and the other one is towards generous service and genuine partnership in the truth. The quote is that the one who does good is from God, and the one who does evil hasn't even seen God. And so this is the same kind of message we've heard before in John's previous writing. Now we go off and talk about this third figure, almost in passing towards the end of this book, or letter. John introduces this third name, that's Demetrius, that we don't know anything about this at all, except for this single verse, but who received a remarkably strong commendation, a good testimony about from everybody, from the truth itself. This may be the messenger who's carrying this letter to Gaius. And John's vouching for his character, saying this person serves as a kind of personal introduction and reference. It's the ancient equivalent of a letter of recommendation. Hey, this is Bob. Bob's fantastic. You should listen to Bob, right? He says that this guy is from the truth itself, suggesting that Demetrius's life character is consistent with the truth that he professes to have. And now John is testifying on his behalf. This guy's life matches what he claims to believe. And so this brief message is a small but a telling detail. The letter largely is concerned with how communities receive and treat traveling workers. John takes this opportunity personally to vouch for at least one of these workers by name, modeling the exact kind of careful, personal endorsement that should accompany a genuine minister as they move from community to community. So now we have the close of this letter, where the third letter of John closes almost identically to the second letter of John, with John's preference for a face-to-face conversation, overcoming the limitations of written correspondence. He hopes to see Gaius personally before long, and the closing greeting is, greet the friends by name. It's a small detail. John simply doesn't want to say hey to all the folks here. He wants Gaius to pass along a greeting to the community and greet each one of them by name individually. Even the briefest letters, John's instinct is towards the personal, the specific, the individual who's known and a loved person rather than a generic cloud. I tell everyone I said, hey. What I'm going to meditate on is the third letter of John gives us something that the rest of the New Testament really, offers, which is a close-up personal snapshot of a real-life church with named individuals making real choices that either serve or damage the spread of the gospel. Gaius, quiet, faithful, hospitable, walking in truth. This other guy, I can't say his name, that's why I don't say it, is ambitious, controlling, willing to harm the church's mission in order to protect his own position. And then Demetrius, vouched for personally by the apostle himself. What stays with me is how ordinary but consequential hospitality turns out to be. Gaius didn't preach sermons that we know of. He didn't write theologies. He opened up his home. He provided for fellow travelers, or for those travelers, and sent them on their way well supplied. John calls this as being a co-worker in the truth. The quiet, practical, often unnoticed work of supporting those who carry the gospel forward is not a lesser form of ministry. It's a genuine partnership in the mission itself. And what I'm going to pray about is being more like Gaius, who's quietly faithful and hospitable, walking in the truth. I think, I live in this house and I have rooms in this house, and I have not made myself available to open it up to, people who come. I go to a student ministry church, and there's a lot of people who travel here looking for a hot meal and a place to stay. And I always felt bad about it because my floors are unfinished. The wall has terrible wallpaper on it. Isn't that ridiculous? These people were living in very lowly conditions, and I'm worried about the wallpaper in my house. And so I'm praying to God to give me better ways of walking in that truth and to protect, us from this idea that we would, our own positions, that maybe it would create harm in our own church, my own position. Maybe it would create harm because someone thought I had really ugly wallpaper. I don't know. But I hope, that God helps me have the strength to be co-workers in the truth and supporting and encouraging those who carry the gospel. And what I want to share with others is that the third letter of John is the principle behind the verse 8 that we ought to support such people and be co-workers in the truth. So if you know someone who feels like their contribution to ministry or gospel is too small, or maybe they're not in a position where they could be a traveling minister, or maybe they're really extreme introverts and they're not the kind of person who would travel place to place and say things to people, they have a way to contribute behind the scenes in a way that matters. Someone who hosts, who quietly supports and gives to these ministers who are traveling place to place, remind them that Gaius had a special place in John's heart. His hospitality made him a genuine partner in spreading the truth and not a passive bystander to it. The truth for every quiet, faithful act of support is as important as some of the bigger facing, truths that we see out there. All right, everyone. Thanks for everything. This is Jill from the North Woods, and you can find everything I do at jillfromthenorthwoods.com. The Bible in Small Steps is about going through stories of the Bible. With the New Testament, we are doing it chapter by chapter. And this will complete the third letter of John and all the letters of John. And we're going to talk about Jude next. Thanks so much for being there.